All right, what is up, y'all? We are here today to talk about 3 things to avoid and 1 thing to do to lose weight and to feel great, and at the same time keep things super simple. All right, now you want to lose weight and you want to have good health over time, and you want things in simple terms. The problem with most diets is they tend to be complicated. They have their own intricacies, and when you get out there to implement it in the real world, you kind of forget what it is that you're supposed to do or what you're looking for. All right, so we just need some simple, basic guidelines that we can put into practice, that we can memorize, and that's what we're offering here today. Now, I have a client that started last week, and her story is like all of ours for the most part. You know, she bounced around from diet to diet, and she would lose some weight, she would gain it back, she'd move on to something else, lose some weight, gain it back, and throughout that entire process, over years and a couple of decades, she also lost her health. We went to the grocery store and she didn't really know how to read labels. I mean, what she looked for was what most of us look for, which is basically total calories, fat calories, sugar calories, or something along those lines. She didn't understand this concept of eating for nutrients to facilitate the body, to give the body what it needs, or eating for metabolic flexibility. And now she feels like she's found what she's looking for, because this is a sustainable way of life, and she truly understands it and believes it because it makes sense, and she's seeing results almost immediately. So diets don't work, all right? Most of us are bouncing around from diet to diet and doing nothing that's really sustainable for a lifetime, when what we want is something that is sustainable and it gives us results for a lifetime. And the reality is that calorie restriction is not going to get you there, because the calories in, calories out methodology is completely flawed. And restrictive and extreme diets won't get you there, because by definition, they're not sustainable, even if you do see temporary short-term results. So what you need is to understand some simple basic concepts, so that when you're out there making decisions, it's easier to make those decisions because you understand and believe in what you're doing. We need to understand the role of insulin in fat storage. We need to understand the role of space and periods of not eating. We need to understand some simple basic foods to avoid. And we need to understand how to teach the body to truly use fat for fuel. So let's start with some simple basic concepts that will help support the things that we're going to recommend. All right, so let's first talk about the compensation theory of exercise and calories, because most of us still believe in this calories in, calories out methodology, which is basically, if I want to lose weight, I want to eat less food and I want to exercise more, because that exercising more is going to burn more calories, right? We all know that trying to eat less and exercise more doesn't work, and the reason is because it kicks into gear these survival mechanisms that makes the body hold on to fat and hold on to energy, and it makes you sluggish. It makes you not want to expend any energy. We've all been there. The calories that you burn during a workout don't really impact your overall fat stores that much, but when you do work out, the more you work out, the more you want to eat. The more you work out, the more you want to rest. And this is what we call the compensation theory. So a lot of times we'll go out and we'll do a long run, or we'll do a really brutal long workout, and then we come back in and we're tired from it, we're hungrier from it, and then we reward ourselves by allowing ourselves to eat more, or eat more of the things that we might not eat in the first place. All right, so now let's combine the compensation theory, which is basically the more I exercise, the more I'm going to want to eat and the more I'm going to want to rest. Let's combine that with what is known as the constrained model of energy expenditure, which we've covered in some videos before, and I'll provide some references and resources so you can check this out. But the latest understanding is that when we measure overall metabolic rate and activity of any human being, from day to day, it doesn't change that much, and it doesn't matter how much you exercise or don't exercise. So if I have a certain amount of energy that I use every day, it's divvied up amongst a bunch of different functions, right? So my brain is going to use a certain amount of energy, my vital functions require a certain amount of energy. We have some optional things like fitness and stress that we can kind of manipulate a little bit, and then also recovery and adaptation. So if I exercise more in an effort to burn more calories, I actually don't burn more calories. I take away some of that energy from my brain function, my vital functions, and my recovery and adaptation. So weight loss is not about eating less and moving more, or measuring out your macros, although that is useful for some people, but for different reasons, because it helps people stay diligent, and it also has this awareness component of what you're eating. Weight loss is about teaching the body how to use healthy fat for fuel by controlling insulin and eliminating the barriers to burning fat. And when this happens, your body fat becomes an energy source, and your body prefers using it versus making you hungry to eat more for more energy. That's ultimately what we're looking for here. So then the question is, what stores body fat? Well, insulin stores body fat. Every time you eat, you secrete insulin, and insulin, by definition, is going to tell your body to use and store energy and nutrients. So then what promotes insulin? Eating in general. Every time you eat, you secrete some insulin, but then carbohydrates specifically raise insulin levels more than any of the macro foods. So then what promotes carb eating? Well, I mean, aside from the fact that we all like them and they taste great, right? In general, we all know from experience that eating carbs promotes the eating of more carbs. But then also eating toxic fats and oils, highly processed industrial plant-based oils, clogs up the energy creation system in the body, and it makes you more carb dependent, and you don't really even understand that this is happening. So then the question is, what inhibits your body from using its own body fat for fuel? Well, based on everything that we just said, insulin is a big driver for it, right? So eating in general, and then specifically eating carbs, is going to have a big impact on this. And then also highly processed industrial plant-based oils. So then how do we reverse that whole process? Well, we reduce carbs. We don't completely eliminate them. We reduce them, and we have some specific rules around it. We reduce your dependency on carbs. We eliminate your exposure to toxic oils because these inhibit the body's ability to use fat for fuel, and they make you more carb dependent. And then we also want to reduce your eating periods so that we have periods of no insulin secretion. And that is when the magic of fat burning is going to happen, as long as you don't have those toxic oils in the mix. So in a very simplistic way of looking at things, these are the three things that we want to avoid. All right, so number one, we say avoid sugar. And when we say avoid sugar, we're not saying be low carb or anti-carb. We're saying avoid dominant sources of sugar with no nutritional value, or dominant sources of sugar that have a lot of anti-nutritional value. So sugar is going to give us the biggest impact on blood sugar levels and insulin secretion. Sugar is going to make you crave more sugar, which creates more of the problem. And sugar is the opposite of fat for fuel. So every time I eat some sugar, I am not teaching the body how to use fat for fuel. And so some examples that we can think of are things like candy, cookies, cakes, sports drinks, energy drinks, juices. Those are all great examples of things that we can avoid, that are easy things to avoid, almost common sense things to avoid. And if we can just make that one of our primary goals, we're probably going to start to see some great results. All right, so the second thing to avoid is grains. Right? By grains, we mean mainly wheat-based products, but we're also talking about commercially produced corn products, other grains such as oats and spelt and rye and barley. And the reality is that grains are just a really cheap source of carbohydrates because they are in everything. Right? It's one of our main agricultural products. They have a huge impact on blood sugars, and it doesn't matter if it's whole or refined grains. And they make you crave more carbs. It's one of the reasons that we see wheat as one of the ingredients on almost all processed foods. And like we said before, sugar and starch are the opposite of fat for fuel. So every time you eat these foods, you're not teaching the body how to use fat for fuel. And also, grains have anti-nutrients that cause digestive issues and inhibit the use of really good nutrients. So some examples of grains are going to be things like breads and pasta and pastries and cereals and tortillas. And again, whole wheat versus refined doesn't really make that much of a difference. You can check out a post that we did recently on the white foods diet, where we talk about glycemic index and glycemic loads of whole grains versus refined grains. But in general, we want to try to avoid grains. So again, keeping things super simple, we're avoiding dominant sources of sugar. And we're not talking about real food sources of sugar like fruits. Dominant sources of sugar like candies and pastries and cookies and cakes and things like that. We're avoiding grains, so things like breads and pastas and pastries. And number three, avoid highly processed plant-based oils. All right, these are things like canola, corn, soybean, vegetable, safflower, sunflower, rice bran, and grapeseed oil, and anything that's hydrogenated or partially hydrogenated. And like we said before, the reason for this is that these toxic oils clog up the energy creation system in the cells. They inhibit the body from using fat for fuel, which makes you more dependent on carbs because that's the only source of energy you can use. And the reality is that at home, it's a super easy swap. We're gonna opt for things like butter and ghee and olive oil over these highly processed oils. Now, out at grocery stores and restaurants, it's a little bit more challenging, but if you follow some simple basic guidelines like reading labels and avoiding these oils, and then avoiding anything fried when you go out to a restaurant, I think you're gonna be making a huge impact on your consumption of these highly processed oils. All right, and then finally, the one thing that you can do is have an awareness around your tendency to want to eat all the time. And basically, this means try not to snack all the time. Try not to be a grazer. Because as we mentioned before, every time you eat food, you secrete some insulin. And yes, we emphasize sugar and grains as, having your body secrete the highest levels of insulin. But every time you eat in general, you are disrupting the body's ability to use fat for fuel. So what we want is this ebb and flow of eating and not eating. And for most of us, we recommend 2 or 3 meals a day with no snacking. And if you avoid those 3 foods, if you avoid sugar, void of a real food context, if you avoid grains and all their different derivatives, and if you avoid the highly processed industrial plant-based oils, and if you have a commitment to not snack all the time, you will see all the results that you want from a real food way of eating. All right, so a lot of people are going to ask for additional information and resources, so we will definitely link to our previous videos on the constrained model of energy expenditure, the White Foods diet video that we did here recently, and then also some information on the compensation theory of exercise and calories. I think the best resources for the industrial toxic plant-based oils is going to be Dr. Kate Shanahan. She has a great recent book called The Fat Burn Fix, which I've read a couple of times and I absolutely love. And then also the work of Dr. Paul Saladino. All right, so any questions, comments, snide remarks, please send them our way. You guys keep it real.